Emily Carter slammed the last quilt onto the general store counter and met the shopkeeper's eyes without flinching. $2. That's all I'm asking. He didn't look down at the fabric. Can't use 'em. She'd heard that answer in 4 towns. The coins in her pocket, 2 dimes and a cracked button, wouldn't survive another night. Her mother had sewn these 7 quilts through arthritis and lamplight and a failing heart. They were everything valuable left in the world. Emily picked them up, walked into the street, and turned toward the largest ranch on the horizon. She was out of choices. She started walking. If this story already has your heart, you are in the right place. Subscribe to this channel and follow along to the very end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, Part 1. The Hayes Ranch sat at the end of a dirt road that had no business being walked in the heat of a Kansas July. Emily felt every inch of it. The leather of her left shoe had begun to separate at the toe sometime around noon, and she'd been curling her foot inward with every step to keep the sole from flapping loose against the ground. 7 quilts wrapped in oilcloth were bundled across her back, tied with twine she'd borrowed from the wagon yard in Caldwell, and had not been able to return. They weren't heavy, the way stone is heavy. They were heavy, the way grief is heavy. The kind of weight that doesn't distribute evenly no matter how many times you shift it. She'd counted her options on the walk. There weren't many left. The general store in Hayes City wouldn't take the quilts. The hotel had no use for them. The woman at the dressmaker's shop had looked at the bundle the way you look at something you feel sorry for, and said she wasn't in the market for second-hand goods, as though the hands that had made them were something to be ashamed of. Emily Carter was not ashamed of those hands. Her mother, Ruth Carter, had sewn quilts the way some women pray steadily, faithfully, with complete attention to what she was doing and why she was doing it. She'd taught Emily to thread a needle at age 5, to set a seam at 7, and to choose colors that told a story rather than just filling a square. The 7 quilts in Emily's bundle were the last things Ruth had made before her joints got too stiff to hold the needle straight. She'd finished the last one 3 weeks before she died, and Emily had wrapped her in it at the end because it was the finest thing she owned, and her mother had earned the finest thing. She'd unwrapped it the next morning. She'd needed it to sell. That was the part she didn't let herself think about directly. Not yet. The ranch gate was standing open. No sign forbidding entry. No hand to ask her business. Emily walked through it. The yard was clean and well kept in the particular way of a man who works with a system rather than by mood. A barn sat to the left, its doors thrown wide. To the right, a house solid wood planking, nothing decorative but level and cared for. A man was crouched at the porch steps replacing a board with methodical, unhurried hammer strokes. He didn't look up when she came into the yard. "Excuse me," Emily said. The hammer came down once more before he stopped. He straightened and turned. He was lean in the way men get who work with their bodies rather than their money. Not a spare inch of anything that hadn't been earned through use. His eyes were dark and direct, and he held the hammer at his side like a man who had forgotten it was there, but would pick it back up the moment this conversation resolved. "Ma'am," he said. Not a question, not a dismissal, just an acknowledgement that she was standing in front of him. "I'm looking for the owner of this property," Emily said. She kept her voice level. She'd practiced this approach through the last mile of road. Professional, calm. She was not here to beg. She was here to conduct a transaction. "You found him," he said. "Daniel Hayes. Emily Carter." She didn't extend her hand because both arms were occupied with the bundle. "I have 7 quilts, handmade, double-stitched. I'm selling them." He looked at the bundle on her back. Then he looked at her face, not up and down, just directly the way a man looks when he's listening. "You walked out from town." "That's right. In this heat." "I'm aware of the heat, Mr. Hayes." Something shifted at the edge of his expression, not quite a smile, but the near neighbor of one. "What are you asking?" $2 apiece, 14 for the lot. I'll sell individually or all together." She'd rehearsed this. She knew the numbers cold, because numbers were one of the few things left she could control. Daniel Hayes looked at her for a moment, past the point of comfort. Not in the way men sometimes looked at a woman alone on a dirt road. There was nothing in his gaze that made her want to step backward. It was more like he was reading something and making sure he had it right before he responded. "Bring them up to the porch," he said. She followed him up the steps and set the bundle down. Her shoulders ached with relief she didn't allow her face to show. She undid the twine and folded back the oilcloth. The quilts were stacked in the order she'd packed them, the simplest on top, the finest at the bottom, because you earn the finest by looking at what came before it. Daniel picked up the top quilt. He opened it out fully. He looked at it the way you look at something when you are actually looking, not glancing, not calculating resale, but reading it. Emily watched him. "That's a log cabin pattern," she said, "double-stitched along every seam. It'll hold its shape through 20 years of washing if you use cold water." "I know the pattern," Daniel said. He turned the quilt and examined the back with the same attention. "The stitching's even, tight." He looked up. "How long did this one take?" 3 weeks. Some of the others ran longer." He set it down and lifted the next. He went through all 7 that way quietly without commentary, which was somehow harder to stand than dismissal would have been. Emily kept her hands clasped in front of her and waited. She had learned patience from watching her mother work. Patience and a certain still pride that doesn't announce itself. When he reached the last quilt, the one from the bottom of the stack, the one that had been wrapped around Ruth Carter on her last morning, and then unwrapped because desperation is its own kind of cruelty, he opened it and held it for a long time without speaking. "The woman who made these," he said finally. "She's gone." It wasn't phrased as a question, and Emily didn't know how he'd read it, but he had. "She passed in April," she said. Daniel folded the quilt carefully with both hands and set it on top of the others. "I'll take all 7, he said. $14 then. I can make... I'll give you 20. She stopped. "Mr. Hayes, these are worth $20, he said. The same flat, direct tone he'd used for everything else. He said it the way you say the sun rises in the east, as though the value were an obvious fact. She had somehow miscalculated, and he was simply correcting the error. "You don't have to do that," Emily said. "I know I don't," he said. "I do a fair number of things I don't have to do. This is one of them." He went inside. She heard a drawer open and close. He came back with paper money and coins and held them out to her. She took them. Her hands were steady. She'd made sure of that. "Thank you," she said. "That's thank you." "You're welcome." He looked at the quilts, then at her. "Where are you headed from here?" "I don't have a firm plan at the moment," she said, which was the most honest answer she could give, without it also being the most crushing. He nodded slowly, looked out at the yard, looked back. "Have you eaten today?" She had not. "A biscuit at dawn, and that was yesterday's biscuit." "I'm fine," she said. "That's not what I asked." No accusation in it. The same direct plainness. "Have you eaten today?" "No," she said. "Stay for supper," he said. Emily opened her mouth to refuse. The refusal was right there. She'd been holding it ready for weeks because you can't afford to owe people things when you're already behind. But something in the way he'd said it stopped her. He hadn't offered with pity. He hadn't used that careful, delicate gentleness people put on when they're conscious of doing you a charity. He'd said it the way you say, "pass the bread," as though it were the natural next thing, a reasonable arrangement between two people of equal standing. "All right," she said. She didn't know why she said it, but she did. The kitchen of the Hayes house was plain and working, and nothing like the deliberate order of the yard outside, which told Emily that the neatness out there was a discipline of labor, and the kitchen was just where a man fed himself without much ceremony. A pot on the stove, bread on the table, and 2 chairs. Emily noted the 2 chairs the way she noted most things, quietly, without comment, filing it away. "Wash up there if you like," Daniel said, nodding toward the basin near the back door. She washed her hands and face. When she turned around, he was cutting the bread with the same even efficiency he'd given to examining the quilts and replacing the porch board. "Were you passing through town or stopping?" he asked. Stopping, Emily said. She sat when he put the bread down because he'd set it there for her, and refusing it would be a statement she didn't intend. I'd been hoping to establish myself, a business. What kind? A quilting shop. She said it without softening the edges. She'd been turning this idea over for months, not since the farm went, not since her father left, not since April. Longer than that. She'd been building the idea in her mind while her mother's hands slowed and the debts grew, and the farm slipped piece by piece out from under them. A shop. Her own. Work that she knew priced at what it deserved, owned by no one but herself. There's a market for quality goods out here. Women want things made by someone who knows what they're doing, and I know what I'm doing. I believe you, Daniel said. She looked up. People didn't say that. Not like that, not that simply, not that fast. There was always a pause, an evaluation, a polite near agreement that meant wait and we'll see. Most people want proof first, Emily said. I saw the quilts, he said. She had no answer for that. They ate in a silence that required no maintenance. That was the surprising thing. Emily had braced herself for the performance of gratitude for the work of being agreeable company to a man whose food she was eating without having earned it. But the silence between them sat easy. It didn't demand filling. You're from Kansas originally, Daniel asked after a while. Eastern edge, near the Missouri border. We had a farm. Past tense, and the past tense said everything. My father had debts. The farm went to cover them. Where is your father now? I don't know. She said it without inflection. She was past the age of dressing it up. He left before the creditors arrived, which is how I ended up walking the quilts instead of selling them 6 months ago the way I'd meant to. Daniel was quiet. He refilled her coffee cup. She hadn't asked, but he poured it, and she drank it because she needed it. You've been carrying this by yourself, he said. Yes. Since April. Since April. 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. She knew the number. Some things you count because the counting is the only grip you have. That's a long time to be in motion, he said. I'm not in motion anymore, Emily said. I intend to stay. Set down roots. She looked at the bread in her hands. That's what I came here to do. Daniel nodded once. There's a space on Main Street, he said. Been empty since March. Was a tailor's shop. Building belongs to a man named Grisham. He's not unreasonable. Emily looked at him. How did you know I'd need a space? You said you wanted to open a shop, he said. A shop needs a building. She looked at him across the table. He was not complicated in the ways men often made themselves complicated, with layers of performance with favors extended sideways and the quiet expectation of something returned at a time of their choosing. What she saw in Daniel Hayes, as far as she could read him, was what he appeared to be. A man who replaced boards, examined fabric, honestly paid fair prices, made coffee and told you where the empty buildings were. She didn't entirely trust it. She had stopped entirely trusting simple things a while back, and she'd had good reasons for stopping. But she didn't disbelieve it either, and distrust without evidence was just fear wearing another name. I'll look into the Grisham building, she said. I could take you by tomorrow, he said. If you haven't a place tonight, the Mercer boarding house is 2 streets east of the feed store. Mrs. Mercer's rates are fair, and she doesn't ask more questions than she needs to. You seem to know a good deal about what's fair in this town, Emily said. I've lived here 12 years, he said. You learn what holds and what doesn't. What brought you here originally? He was quiet a beat longer than he'd been quiet on anything else. A different kind of quiet. I had a farm too, he said finally. Further north. It didn't survive. He left it there, and she left it with him, because she understood the grammar of loss. You say what the words will hold, and the rest you keep. She helped him clear the table. He didn't tell her not to. She washed the bowls, and he dried them standing beside her, and that small ordinary fact, a man and a woman sharing a task in a kitchen without ceremony or performance, produced something in Emily's chest that she refused to name. She couldn't remember the last time someone had stood beside her, and just done a thing alongside her as though it were the natural arrangement between people. She focused on the bowls. When they were done, Daniel said, "You've got $20, a lead on a space, a place to sleep." He said it the way an accountant tallies a column. "That's more than you walked in with this morning." "Considerably more," Emily agreed. "Then you're ahead," he said. Simple as that. No sermon attached, no warmth applied to make it sentimental. Just the arithmetic she was ahead. She picked up her empty oilcloth bundle from the porch. The 7 quilts were stacked where she'd left them. She looked at them for a moment. 7 pieces of fabric that had traveled from her mother's hands to a stranger's porch in Kansas, and what they had purchased for her was not charity. It was a start. A real one. She looked at Daniel Hayes. He was standing in the doorway with his arms easy at his sides, not filling the frame on purpose and not trying to extend the evening. Just present. "Why did you pay more than I asked?" she said. He looked at the quilts. "Because that's what they were worth." "You said that before." "It's still true," he said. "A lot of men would have offered half and waited to see if I'd take it," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not a lot of men." She held his gaze for a long moment. She was good at reading people. She had learned this the hard way, the way most useful things are learned through necessity and error. What she read in Daniel Hayes was something she had genuinely stopped expecting to encounter: a person who said what he meant what he said, and did not require anything from her in return for either one. She didn't know what to do with that. She wasn't sure she needed to know yet. "Thank you for supper, Mr. Hayes," she said. "Thank you for the quilts, Miss Carter," he said. She walked across the yard and through the gate. At the road she stopped and turned back once. He was still in the doorway, not watching with weight or possession. Just there the way a solid thing is there, reliable, unremarkable, holding its ground. She turned and walked toward town. The $20 in her pocket felt different from the 2 dimes and the cracked button she'd started the morning with. It felt like more than money. She couldn't have said precisely what it felt like because naming it required a certainty she hadn't earned yet. But she walked with her spine straight and her left shoe curling at the toe and the empty oilcloth over her arm, and for the first time in 3 months, 2 weeks and 4 days, she did not feel like a woman running out of road. Jacope. Mrs. Mercer was indeed a woman who asked no more questions than she needed to. She looked at Emily's dusty dress and empty bundle and produced a key with no commentary. $1 a week, she said. "Breakfast is included. I expect clean and quiet." "I'm both," Emily said. The room was at the end of the hall. A window, a bed, and a quilt, store-bought loose-stitched, the kind that comes apart at the seams in 3 years if it's used regularly. Emily recognized the workmanship, immediately measured it against her mother's, and set the comparison aside without judgment. She sat on the edge of the bed and counted the money again. $20. A room for 20 weeks if she was careful. Time to build. She pressed one palm flat against the store-bought quilt and thought about the 7 her mother had made. She thought about them on Daniel Hayes's porch, and then inside his house, and she thought about the way he'd held the last one, the quilt that had been wrapped around Ruth Carter on her final morning longer than the others, without saying a word about it. He'd known. Without being told, he'd understood that quilt was different. Emily lay back and looked at the ceiling. Outside, a horse moved in the back lot. A voice said something low. A door closed, then quiet. 3 months, 2 weeks and 4 days of not knowing where she'd wake up the next morning. And now she had a key in her hand. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried since April, and she was not going to begin now. Not over $1 a week room and a fair price. And a man who'd paid what a thing was worth without making her feel lesser for having needed the money. She was going to sleep. She was going to rise before breakfast. She was going to find the Grisham building and look at what a shop required and make the calculations and draw up a plan. Because that is what you do when the road appears in front of you. You don't look back at the miles that nearly finished you. You walk. Emily was at the Grisham building before 7 in the morning. She'd been awake since 5, lying in the boarding house bed, running numbers in her head the way her mother used to count stitches methodically without rushing. Because a count done in a hurry is a count you do twice. She knew what a shop required. She knew what supplies cost, what rent meant, what a first month with no customers looked like against a month where word had spread and women started coming through the door. She'd lived in her mother's quilting world long enough to understand the economics of handmade goods. The margin was thin. It required precision. But it was possible. That word possible was the one she kept returning to. The building on Main Street had a cracked front window and a door that stuck in the frame, and when she pressed her face to the glass and looked inside, she saw a wood floor that needed attention and walls bare to the plank, and she felt something loosen in her chest that she'd been holding tight since April. It was the right size. It faced east, which meant morning light. There was a back room, which meant storage. It was exactly what she'd been building in her mind. Admiring the view, or do you intend to purchase it? She spun around. The man on the boardwalk behind her was short and wide through the chest, with a ring of keys on his belt that swayed when he moved. He had the look of a man who tallied things, properties, debts people. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Grisham about the lease," Emily said. "You're speaking with him." He looked her over in the straightforward way of a businessman conducting an appraisal. "Grisham. And you are?" "Emily Carter. I'm looking to open a quilting shop." Grisham made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "A quilting shop." "That's right." "Miss Carter, I've had 3 men inquire about this space since March. None of them came through. What makes you think—" "What are you asking per month?" Emily said. He paused. $8. "I'll give you 6 for the first 2 months, 8 from the 3rd month forward, provided my business is running. If I haven't opened within 30 days, you keep whatever I've paid, and we part ways." Grisham looked at her the way people had been looking at her for months, like a woman who didn't quite fit the shape of the situation she'd walked into. "You've got $6. I've got 20, Emily said. "But I have expenses, and I intend to conduct this negotiation as a business matter rather than a charity arrangement. So $6 for the first month, or I'll look at what else is available on this street." There was a silence that lasted long enough to mean something. "7? Grisham said. 6.5, Emily said. "And you fix the window." He stared at her, then he unclipped the ring from his belt and found the key. "I fixed the window," he said. 30-day trial, 6.5 the first month." She took the key. Mom. She was measuring the back room by pacing it off 12 feet by 9, more than enough when she heard the front door push open. She came out expecting Grisham with second thoughts, and found Daniel Hayes standing just inside the entrance, hat in hand, looking at the bare walls with the same quiet attention he'd given the quilts. She felt something she hadn't expected. The sight of him there in the building she'd just leased in the town she'd just decided was hers produced a warmth she could not precisely account for. "How did you know I was here?" she asked. "Mrs. Mercer said you'd left early." He looked at the cracked window. "Grisham fixed that for you." He agreed to. Daniel nodded. He turned, looked the space over slowly, wall to wall. "It's a good size." "I know," Emily said. "I need shelving along the back wall and a table in the center. I'll work from the back room. Display up front." She paused. "I don't have the lumber for the shelving yet." "I do," Daniel said. She looked at him. "Mr. Hayes. I've got planks from a fence repair last fall. They're sound. I'd have to cut them to length." He met her eyes. "It's not charity. I'd want to see them used for something worth using them for." "You'd be giving me lumber," Emily said. "I'd be giving you old fence planks," he said. "Difference is considerable." She looked at him for a long moment. She had learned in the months since her father left, and the farm went, and she'd been forced to navigate the world alone, that she could not afford to refuse help that was offered honestly. The refusal felt like pride. But pride didn't build shelving, and she needed shelving. "All right," she said. "Old fence planks, thank you." Something happened at the edge of his expression again, that near neighbor of a smile. "I can bring them over this afternoon." "I'll be here," she said. She was here. And so was most of Main Street, or so it felt. By the time Daniel arrived with the planks in his wagon, 2 women from the dressmaker's shop 2 doors down had found reasons to stop in front of the window and look. A man from the feed store came over and said something to Daniel that Emily couldn't hear from inside. She watched through the cracked glass as Daniel answered him shortly and picked up the first plank without elaborating. The man from the feed store went away with an expression she recognized, the particular expression of someone who has pride without success and not quite accepted it yet. Emily held the door. "You're already drawing attention," she said. "You'll draw more when you open," Daniel said. He set the plank inside and went back for another. "This town doesn't get a lot of new businesses, and it's never had a quilting shop. Is that a problem?" "No," he said. "It's just a fact. People are curious." He came back with a second plank. "Most of them are decent. Some of them are the other kind." "Which kind are the ones from the feed store?" Daniel set the plank down. "Harlan Pruitt runs the feed store," he said. "He also runs the opinion of a fair number of people on this street. He decides fast about folks, and he doesn't revise easily." He looked at her. "He was watching you from the time you walked to Grisham's door this morning. I heard he told 3 people at the feed store that a woman alone trying to run a business on Main Street was a risk to property values." Emily felt something tighten between her shoulder blades. "A risk to property values," she said. "That's what he said." "What did those 3 people say in return?" "2 of them agreed with him," Daniel said. "One of them told him to mind his own affairs." He picked up the next plank. "That third one was Nora Bell, who runs the millinery at the end of the street. She's already decided she likes you." Emily blinked. "She doesn't know me." "She knows you negotiated Grisham down to 6.5, Daniel said. "In this town, that makes you a person of interest." He set the plank against the wall. "She'll be in before end of week." Emily looked at the planks, 6 of them solid and straight, smelling of old wood and dry Kansas air, and made herself focus on the task. On the shelf, spacing on the measurements on the work. Because the alternative was to think too hard about the fact that Harlan Pruitt had already decided against her before she'd opened a single seam. "How do I get past Pruitt?" she asked. "You don't," Daniel said. He was pulling a measuring tape from his pocket. "You work. People watch. They make up their own minds eventually. Pruitt's opinion only holds as long as there's nothing to contradict it." He looked at her. "Give them something to contradict it with." Emily picked up one end of the measuring tape. "Hold this," he said, and she held it to the wall while he walked it to the far corner, and they stood there in her empty shop, measuring the wall for shelving, and she thought, this is what it looks like. This is what a beginning looks like. Nora Bell arrived on Thursday. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and the bearing of someone who had built something and knew what that required. She walked in, looked around at the 3 completed shelves and the work table Emily had assembled from a doorboard and 2 sawhorses and said, "You did this in 3 days." "There's more to do," Emily said. "There's always more to do," Nora said. "I opened my millinery in 9 days start to finish and I had help." She picked up one of the 2 practice quilts Emily had started since arriving, samples for display, not for sale, worked in the mornings before the shop needed her. "Lord in heaven," Nora said quietly. "Who taught you this?" "My mother." Nora set it down with care. She looked at Emily with the directness of a woman who has stopped padding her words because life is short. "I have 12 women in my sewing circle," she said. "We meet Wednesdays. Every single one of them has tried to find decent quilting supplies in this county for the past 2 years. What they've been getting out of the general store is garbage." She said the word cleanly without apology. "Can you source good fabric, cotton broadcloth, wool batting, thread that doesn't break on the second seam?" "I can source it," Emily said. Because she could. She knew the suppliers. She knew the grades, the prices, the vendors who cut corners, and the vendors who didn't. This was the one domain in which she was unquestionably fluent. Nora Bell nodded once. "Then you'll have business before your 30 days are up." She moved toward the door, then stopped. "A word," she said. Tone shifted, not unfriendly, but level. Warning level. Emily waited. "Harlan Pruitt is the kind of man who doesn't stop at opinion," Nora said. "He spoke to Grisham again yesterday. I don't know what he said, but I know Grisham looked uncomfortable this morning. You'd do well to make sure your arrangement is in writing." The air in the room changed. Emily had the key. She had Grisham's word. She had not thought to put it on paper because it had felt settled, and she had let herself believe settled things stayed settled. That had been a mistake before. She knew that. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Nora said. "Get it in writing." She left. Demand. Emily was at Grisham's door before noon. He looked surprised to see her, and then he looked the particular kind of uncomfortable that a man looks when he has been having a conversation he hadn't wanted witnessed. "Miss Carter," he said, "I wasn't expecting." "I'd like to put our agreement on paper," Emily said. $6.50 the first month, 8 from the third month forward, 30-day trial, window repair included. She paused. "I can write it out if you have paper and ink." Grisham shifted his weight. "That seems like a good deal of formality for Mr. Grisham," Emily said. "I am a woman alone running a business on your street. I would like our arrangement documented. That protects both of us. Wouldn't you agree?" The shift in his face told her what she'd needed to know. Someone had spoken to him. Someone with more weight in this town than she currently carried had suggested gently, probably, in the way that powerful suggestions are always made gently, that the arrangement might benefit from reconsideration. Harlan Pruitt had moved faster than she'd expected. "Paper and ink." "Mr. Grisham," Emily said. Her voice did not change. Her hands did not move. Whatever was turning over in her chest, and it was turning hard. The old fear, the particular dread of watching solid ground dissolve without warning, none of it came to the surface. She had learned this at her mother's table. You keep your hands still, and you keep your voice even, and you keep going. Grisham found the paper. She wrote it out herself, every term in clean and careful hand. She dated it. She signed it. Grisham signed it. She took her copy and folded it and put it in the pocket of her dress over her heart, where the $20 had been. "Thank you, Mr. Grisham," she said. He didn't meet her eyes as she left. Daniel was at the ranch when she arrived. She hadn't planned to go to the ranch. She'd been heading back to the shop, and then her feet had turned, and she'd walked the road without making a decision about walking it. And now she was standing in his yard, and he was coming out of the barn, and his expression when he saw her was careful. Reading. "What happened?" he said. "Nothing permanent," she said. "I got the agreement in writing." He stopped walking. "What made you think you needed to—" "Nora Bell." He nodded. His jaw was set in a way it hadn't been set before. "Pruitt talked to Grisham," Emily said. "I don't know exactly what was said, but I know Grisham looked like a man with a problem when I walked up." Daniel was quiet for a moment that felt long. "Pruitt doesn't like new things unless he controls them," he said. "And he doesn't like people who make arrangements without going through him first." "I didn't know there was a protocol," Emily said. There was an edge to her voice she hadn't intended, not aimed at Daniel but present. "There isn't a written one," he said. "It's just how he operates." Emily looked at him. "Is he going to be a problem?" The pause was answer enough. "Tell me straight," she said. "Yes," Daniel said. "He might be." She took that in. Let it sit. "Why?" "Because you're making Grisham money he didn't expect, and you came in without asking anyone's permission, and in Pruitt's calculation that means you're outside his system, and he makes it his business to bring outside things inside or push them out entirely." Daniel looked at her steadily. "He's done it before." "To who?" "To me," Daniel said. The word landed between them quietly. Emily waited. "When I first came here," Daniel said, "I bought land. Pruitt had been planning to acquire. I didn't know it at the time. I paid a fair price, followed the law, did everything right. He made the first 2 years of this ranch the hardest 2 years I've lived." He paused. He stopped eventually. "Because I didn't leave." The 2 words rang. "I didn't leave." Emily looked at the agreement in her pocket, looked at the ranch, at the boards of the porch he'd replaced 2 days ago, at the man standing in front of her who'd lived 12 years in a town that had tried to squeeze him out before it accepted him. "He's going to find out you helped me," she said. "The lumber, the Grisham building. If he's watching—" "He's watching," Daniel said. "He watched me walk the planks in on Wednesday." She felt it then, the weight of what she'd accepted without understanding. "Mr. Hayes, if I cause you trouble with Pruitt—" "You didn't cause anything," Daniel said. "He makes his own trouble and assigns it to whoever he dislikes that week." He looked at her directly. "And I am not a man who decides what to do based on what Harlan Pruitt thinks about it." Emily pressed her hand flat against her pocket, against the paper she'd put over her heart. "I have 12 women coming into my shop next Wednesday," she said. "Nora Bell's sewing circle." Daniel looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. Not the near neighbor of a smile this time. The actual thing. Quiet and brief and entirely real. "Then you've got 6 days to be ready," he said. "I know," she said. "Do you need anything?" She thought about it honestly, which is the only way she permitted herself to think about her own needs anymore. "Thread," she said. "Good quality. And cotton batting. I have a list." She reached into her other pocket and produced the small paper she'd been keeping. "I can order from the catalog, but that takes 2 weeks." Daniel took the list, read it. "Cooper in Abilene carries most of this. I make a run Thursday morning." He looked up. "I could bring it back by Thursday evening." "What do you charge?" Emily said. Because there was a thing between them unsaid but present, and she needed to name it before it became something she owed without having agreed to it. He looked at her steadily. "Nothing," he said. "This time." She looked at him. "This time," he said again. "Because you're starting from nothing, and that's not a good time to be charged for favors." He folded the list. "After that you pay my costs and we're square." Emily Carter stood in the yard of a man she had known for 4 days, and looked at the folded list in his hand, and understood with a clarity that surprised her that she was not afraid of him. She had been afraid of many things in the past 3 months, of running out of money, of running out of time, of the creditors and the courts, and the empty road and the shops that turned her away. She had not once in any of those fears anticipated that the thing most likely to undo her steadiness was a man standing in a dirt yard who kept a list of her supplies and brought fence planks and said this time without asking for anything in return. She was going to have to be careful, not of him, of herself. "Thursday evening," she said. "I'll be at the shop." "I'll find you there," he said. She turned and walked back toward Main Street. She did not look behind her, but she was aware without looking that he was still standing in the yard, and she was aware of something else. Something she had not permitted herself to feel since April, the tentative, fragile, stubborn thing that a person feels when they begin to believe that the road ahead might lead somewhere worth arriving. Nora Bell's sewing circle arrived at 9 o'clock Wednesday morning, like a small determined army. There were 11 of them. Nora had said 12, but one woman had a sick child, and sent her apologies by way of the woman walking beside her, who reported this information to the group at large while removing her hat and looking around the shop with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and assessment. Emily had been awake since 4. The shelving was finished. The 2 display quilts were hung. The work table was cleared and centered. She'd had nothing to offer them but the space itself and her own knowledge, and she'd decided that morning that those 2 things would have to be enough. They were enough. The first question came from a stout woman named Margaret Hale, who moved directly to the nearest display quilt and pressed her thumb against the stitching at the corner seam. "Double locked," she said. "Triple on the corners," Emily said. "The corner is where the stress concentrates. Single or double lock opens up inside a year if the quilt gets regular use." Margaret looked at Nora. Something passed between them that Emily wasn't meant to see but saw anyway. "Where did you train?" said another woman, younger than the rest, with ink-stained fingers that said she was a teacher or a clerk. "My mother," Emily said. "Ruth Carter. She learned from her mother and her mother's mother before that. It's not a trained craft in my family. It's a spoken one, passed hand to hand." The room was quiet in a way that meant she had their attention completely. "I've been getting my batting from the general store," said a woman in the back. "It comes apart inside 6 months, lumps up in the wash." "That's low-grade carded cotton," Emily said. "I can source you batting that won't lump. I can also show you how to tell the difference before you buy it." She looked around the room. "That's what I want this shop to be. Not just a place you buy things, a place you learn what you're buying and why it matters." Nobody moved for a moment. Then Margaret Hale said, "Show me the corner stitch." Emily showed her. And then she showed 11 other women. And the next 2 hours went by the way good work hours go quickly completely, with no spare attention left over for anything outside the room. She sold $42 of supplies before noon. $42 in 2 hours. Her hands were shaking when she counted it alone in the back room during the 10 minutes after the women left and before she allowed herself to sit down. Not from fear. From something she hadn't felt in so long, she'd half convinced herself it wasn't available to her anymore. It felt like winning. It felt exactly like winning. She was still standing in the back room holding the money when the front door opened. She assumed it was Nora coming back for the spool of thread she'd left on the corner of the table. It was not Nora. Harlan Pruitt was shorter than she'd imagined from Daniel's description, and broader with a mustache that he wore like a statement of authority, and small eyes that moved around the shop with the quick calculating focus of a man appraising inventory. He held his hat not because he was being polite, but because holding it gave his hands something to do. Emily came out of the back room and stood at her work table. She did not move toward him, and she did not step back. "Mr. Pruitt," she said. His eyes stopped moving and settled on her. "You know who I am," he said. "I know your name," she said. He looked around the shop again. At the shelving, the display quilts, the cleared table. "Nice little setup," he said. The word little was not an accident. "Thank you," Emily said, as though it had been a compliment. He looked at her then, and she saw him recalculate. He'd expected something else from her nerves probably, or deference. People who had heard about him usually arrived pre-softened. She hadn't arrived at anything. She was standing at her own table, in her own shop, and waiting for him to state his business. "I wanted to welcome you to Main Street," he said. "That's kind," Emily said. "It's a tight-knit community," he said. "We look after our own." "I intend to be your own," Emily said. "I opened 4 days ago and I've already had 11 customers. I believe I'll fit in well." The mustache moved. 11 customers, he said. $42 in sales this morning, Emily said. Because if he was going to stand in her shop and conduct an appraisal, she was going to give him the numbers. Let him appraise those. He looked at the shelving again. At the fence planks Daniel had cut and fitted. "Nice lumber," he said. "Where'd you source it?" There it was. Emily met his eyes. "I sourced it locally," she said. "Locally," he repeated. "Daniel Hayes locally." "I don't believe my supplier arrangements are your concern, Mr. Pruitt." The small eyes steadied. He'd stopped pretending this was a welcome call, and she'd stopped pretending to receive it as one, and now they were both standing on the actual ground of the conversation, which was, he had come to measure what she was made of, and she was showing him. "Daniel Hayes is a fine man," Pruitt said carefully. "But he's a man who makes poor judgments about who deserves his loyalty. I'd hate to see that cause difficulties." "For whom?" Emily said. He put his hat back on, adjusted the brim. "You have a good day, Miss Carter," he said. He left. Emily stood absolutely still until the sound of his boots on the boardwalk faded. Then she sat down in the chair behind her table and pressed both palms flat on the surface and breathed. Not because she was frightened, because she needed a moment to process what had just happened clearly without the static of emotion getting in the way. Pruitt had not come to welcome her. He had come to warn her. And the warning had a shape Daniel Hayes's name, which meant Pruitt intended to use Daniel as the lever apply pressure there, where she couldn't easily defend where her own resistance would mean causing harm to someone who had helped her. That was clever. She had to give him that. It was a very clever angle. She was going to have to be cleverer. Daniel arrived Thursday evening as he'd promised supplies in the wagon bed, and the moment he stepped through the door and looked at her face, he said, "Pruitt came by." "How did you know?" Emily said. "Because you look like you've been thinking hard about something you don't want to tell me," he said. "And the only new thing that's happened since I saw you Monday is Pruitt." He set the packages on the table. "What did he say?" She told him. All of it, including the part about his name, including the phrase "poor judgments" about who deserves his loyalty. She watched Daniel's jaw work through the information with the same steady patience he gave everything else, and when she finished, he was quiet for longer than usual. "He used me to warn you," Daniel said. "Yes. And you're telling me because it's your name," Emily said. "And because I won't be the reason someone helps me and then pays for it. If my being here causes you trouble with Pruitt again—" "Emily," Daniel said. She stopped. It was the first time he'd used her given name. She didn't know why it stopped her the way it did, but it did. "I told you Monday," he said. "I don't make decisions based on Harlan Pruitt's preferences. That was true Monday, and it's true tonight, and it'll be true next week." He looked at her. "The only thing that changes anything for me is if you tell me to step back. If you decide you'd rather handle this without the complication of my involvement. That's your right, and I'd understand it." The shop was quiet. Emily looked at the packages of batting and thread and broadcloth he'd driven to Abilene and back to bring her. "I'm not telling you to step back," she said. He nodded once. "Then we're settled," he said. They unpacked the supplies together, and she checked each item against her list, and he was quiet in the way she had come to understand was his natural register, not absence, not withdrawal, just a man comfortable with silence because he'd never needed noise to feel present. She noticed as she worked beside him that she had stopped bracing against his presence. The first day in the shop, she'd been aware of him as a variable, something to account for, to be careful of. Now he was just there, and there felt like the right word for it. $42 Wednesday morning, she told him while she was cataloging the thread. He looked at her. "Nora Bell's Circle," she said. 11 women, 2 hours. Something lit in his face. Not the controlled near smile, the real one again, and it changed him the way it had the other day, opened something in his expression that the rest of his face usually kept closed. "Emily," he said. "Don't," she said. "I'll get sentimental and I can't afford that right now." He laughed. A short, genuine sound she hadn't heard from him before, and it startled her because it was warm and entirely unguarded. "All right," he said. "I won't." But the laugh stayed in the room for a while after it ended. She found the letter on Friday morning. It was slipped under the shop door overnight on plain paper, no envelope, printed in block letters, not cursive, the hand of someone who didn't want their writing recognized. It said, "Your father's debts follow families. This town knows who you are. Leave before you owe more than you can pay." Emily read it twice. She folded it. She put it in her pocket next to the lease agreement. She opened the shop at 7 o'clock and served her first customer at 7:15. But the letter sat in her pocket like a coal all morning, and by afternoon she could not keep her mind from pulling at it. Her father's debts. She had been told by the creditors, by the county clerk, by the lawyer she'd paid $3 to sit with her for 30 minutes in Topeka that the debts were his alone. That a daughter did not inherit a father's obligations. That was the law. But the law and what people said about you were different instruments, and she knew Pruitt could use the second to undo everything the first had promised her. If it got around that her father had left debts behind, if that became the story people told about her, before she could build a different story with her hands and her work and her 42 Wednesday dollars, it could close the shop before Pruitt needed to do anything official at all. She was still working through the implications when the door opened and Nora Bell came in. Nora looked at Emily's face and said, "What happened?" Emily showed her the letter. Nora read it. Her expression didn't change dramatically. She was not a woman given to dramatic expressions, but something cooled in her eyes. "This is Pruitt," she said. I assumed, Emily said. He's done this before. Nora set the letter on the table. 3 years ago, there was a woman who came here wanting to open a laundry. Widow. Good businesswoman. Pruitt didn't want the competition with his cousin's operation in the next street. He started a whisper about her husband's past drink gambling. She'd had nothing to do with any of it, and within 6 weeks, she was gone. Nora looked at Emily. She shouldn't have left, but she was alone, and she didn't know the ground she was standing on. What ground am I standing on? Emily said. Better ground than she had, Nora said. You've got 12 women who spent money in your shop and intend to come back. You've got a written lease. And you've got Daniel Hayes, which in this town means more than a signed paper. She paused. The question is, what you do now? Emily thought about it. Not the frightened kind of thinking, the working kind. I need to know exactly what my father's debts were and where they currently stand, she said. If Pruitt is going to use them against me, I need to know the precise facts before he can distort them. That means the county records, Nora said. That means Abilene, Emily said. County seat. 2 hours by wagon each way. And I need someone with legal knowledge to read them with me. I don't know land law. Nora was quiet for a moment. Daniel knows land law, she said carefully. Emily looked up. He fought a boundary dispute with Pruitt 3 years ago, Nora said. He studied the statutes himself because he couldn't afford a lawyer long term. He won. She met Emily's eyes. He knows exactly how Pruitt operates, legally speaking. Better than anyone in this county. Emily picked up the folded letter. How did Daniel win? She said. He found a filing error in Pruitt's land claim, Nora said. A date discrepancy. Pruitt had recorded the claim one day after the legal window closed, and Daniel found it in the county records when Pruitt's lawyer said there was no irregularity. She paused. Pruitt's been carrying that loss for 3 years. The room reorganized itself around this information. Pruitt hadn't warned her about Daniel because Daniel was a convenient lever. He'd warned her about Daniel because Daniel had beaten him once on paper on Pruitt's own ground, and Pruitt had not forgiven it. And now Daniel was helping her, which meant Pruitt saw Daniel's hand in her survival and was going to move against both of them. I need to talk to Daniel, Emily said. She found him at the ranch before sundown. She'd walked the road faster than she'd ever walked it, the letter in one pocket and the lease agreement in the other, and by the time she came through the gate, she'd already decided how she was going to say what she needed to say. Directly. No softening, no roundabout. She was past the age of talking sideways. He came out of the barn when he heard her, took one look at her face and said, "Sit down." "I'm fine standing," she said. "Emily, sit down." She sat on the porch step. He sat beside her, not facing her, beside her, which meant they were both looking at the same yard, the same fading light, the same ground, and she found she could talk more easily that way. She gave him the letter. He read it. His face did not change. That was somehow the most frightening response available. Not anger, not surprise. Just a slow and total stillness that meant he had arrived somewhere he had been expecting to arrive. "He moved faster than I thought," Daniel said. "Nora told me about the boundary dispute," Emily said. "About the filing error, about what you did." He was quiet. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. "When you said Pruitt was going to be a problem, why didn't you tell me the whole shape of it?" "Because I didn't want you making decisions about your shop based on my history with him," Daniel said. "That wouldn't have been fair to you." And now, he looked at the letter. "Now it's not my history anymore," he said. "It's yours." She looked at his profile in the fading light. The steadiness of him. The way he held difficult things without flinching and without pretending they weren't heavy. "I want to go to the county records in Abilene," she said. "I want to find what he's planning to use, and I want to understand it before he uses it." Nora said, "You know land law." "Some of it," he said. "Will you come with me?" He looked at her then, directly the way he always looked at her. When? Tomorrow, she said. Early. I can have the wagon ready by 5, he said. Emily nodded. She started to stand and then stopped because there was one more thing she needed to say, and she was going to say it while she still had the momentum of honesty working in her favor. Daniel. He turned. Pruitt is coming after you through me. You know that. Yes, he said. And you're still going to Abilene with me tomorrow. Yes, he said. She looked at him. Why? He was quiet for a moment that had weight to it. Then he said, because some things are worth the trouble they cost. He said it the way he said everything plainly without ornament, as though it were simply the most accurate statement available, and he saw no reason to dress it otherwise. Emily Carter stood in Daniel Hayes's yard in the last of the July light and felt something shift in the architecture of what she'd believed was possible for herself. She'd come to this town to build a business, to be self-sufficient, to need no one's rescue and no one's charity. She had done those things. The lease was real, the $42 was real, the letter in her pocket was real, and she intended to answer it on paper in a county record office with a man who knew how. She had not come here to feel this. But there it was, quiet and unwanted and absolutely genuine the way only the most inconvenient things ever are. She looked at the hand holding the letter, his hand still holding it as though by keeping it he was keeping the problem with him, so she didn't have to carry it alone tonight. 5 o'clock, she said. 5 o'clock, he said. She walked back to town, in the dark. And for the first time in a long time, the dark did not feel like something closing in. It felt like cover, like the particular shelter of a night that is moving toward a morning where something important is going to happen. She intended to be ready for it. The wagon rolled out before the town was awake. Emily sat beside Daniel on the bench with her hands in her lap and the letter in her pocket, and 3 pages of notes she'd written by lamplight the night before. Every fact she knew about her father's debts, every name, every date, every number she could reconstruct from memory. She had always had a precise memory for numbers. Her mother used to say it was a gift. Emily had come to understand it as a survival tool. They didn't speak much in the first hour. The road to Abilene in early morning was quiet, in the way that feels like the world holding its breath, and Emily used the quiet to organize her thinking. She ran through what she knew her father Thomas Carter had borrowed against the farm twice. Once from a private lender in 1874, once from a land company in 1876. The farm had been surrendered to cover both debts in the spring of 1878. She had been present for none of the legal proceedings. Her father had handled everything alone, or rather had failed to handle everything alone, and by the time Emily understood the full scope of it, the papers were signed, and he was gone. What she did not know, what kept her awake last night, was whether there were other debts. Ones she hadn't been told about, ones Pruitt might have found. Tell me what you know about land liens in Kansas, she said. Daniel glanced at her. Specifically, how does a creditor attach a lien to property? And what happens if the debtor transfers the property or abandons it? A lien attaches to the property, not the person, Daniel said. If the farm was surrendered and the debt satisfied from the proceeds, the lien dies with the sale. The creditor can't pursue the debtor's family afterward. He paused. Unless the lien wasn't fully satisfied. If the sale proceeds didn't cover the full amount, the creditor can file a deficiency judgment. Against the debtor personally. Against the debtor, Emily said. Not the family. Not the family, Daniel said. A child doesn't inherit a parent's personal debt in Kansas. That's been settled law since '72. She let that sit. It was what the lawyer in Topeka had told her. But hearing it from someone who had actually read the statutes and applied them in court gave it a different weight. So even if my father's debts weren't fully cleared, she said, they can't legally come after me. No, Daniel said, they can't. But Pruitt doesn't need to come after me legally, Emily said. The silence that followed confirmed it. He just needs people to believe he could, Daniel said. Or to believe there's something shameful enough in your background that the town turns on you before you've had time to prove otherwise. Which is why I need to see the actual records, Emily said. Not to protect myself legally, To protect myself from the story he's building. Daniel nodded. You want the facts before he gets to rewrite them. I want every fact in that county record, Emily said. Dates, amounts, names, everything. She looked at him. And I want to understand whether there's anything else. Anything I don't know about. He looked at her with the careful attention he gave to important things. You're worried there's something your father didn't tell you. It wasn't a question, and she was tired of treating it as one. My father, Emily said, was a man who made large decisions in private and announced the results when there was nothing left to change. I loved him. I also know exactly what he was capable of keeping from me. She paused. If there's something in that record that surprises me, I would rather be surprised in a county office in Abilene than in my own shop in front of my customers. Daniel said nothing. He didn't offer reassurance, didn't tell her it would probably be fine. She was grateful for that. She was profoundly tired of people making promises about things they couldn't know. The county records office in Abilene smelled of old paper and dust, and the particular closed-air stillness of rooms where important things are stored without ceremony. A clerk named Whitfield Young, efficient with the permanently distracted look of a man managing more paperwork than was reasonable, found the Carter land records in 11 minutes. He set 2 folders on the table and left them to it. Emily opened the first folder. Daniel moved his chair beside hers without being asked, and they read together, and she was aware of his shoulder near hers, and the warmth of him, and the steadiness, and she filed all of that away, because right now what mattered was the paper in front of her. The first debt. 1874. Lender named Aldous Marsh. Amount $340. The farm sale in April 1878 had produced $312 after costs. Deficiency $28. Filed against Thomas Carter personally. Outstanding. Emily noted it. $28 against her father personally. Not her. The second debt. 1876. A land company called Western Territorial Holdings. Amount $180. The same farm sale had fully satisfied this one. Leon released April 14, 1878. She turned to the second folder and stopped. The third document was not something she had known about. It was a filing dated February 1878. 2 months before her mother died. 2 months before the farm sale, during the exact period when Emily had been in the house nursing her mother and believing her father was managing things. A promissory note. Thomas Carter borrower. Amount $200. Lender listed as H.J. Pruitt, registered agent for Consolidated Land Holdings of Hayes County. Emily's hands went very still on the paper. Harlan Pruitt. Her father had borrowed $200 from Harlan Pruitt's company 2 months before he disappeared. Daniel had gone still beside her. He'd read it at the same moment she had. She could feel the change in him, not alarm exactly, but a sharpening. The same quality his face got when he'd received information that required recalculating. He was your father's creditor, Daniel said. He didn't tell me, Emily said. Her voice was completely level. She was aware from a great distance that what she was feeling was not fear. It was colder than fear. It was the specific sensation of understanding how something works. He didn't tell me because he didn't need to. He already knew who I was before I walked into the shop on Main Street. He knew my name before I told him. He let you sign the lease, Daniel said. He signed the lease, Emily said. On the day I asked for it in writing. She pressed one finger to the date on the promissory note. Which means he has a document in which I signed an agreement, and he has this document, and if he's clever, and he is clever, he's already figured out how to connect them. He can't, Daniel said. The note is against your father, not you. Legally, no. Emily looked up. But what if he presents it to Grisham not as a legal claim, but as evidence of character? Thomas Carter borrowed money and vanished. His daughter shows up in town 6 months later. How long before Grisham decides the lease is a liability? She paused. Grisham already looked uncomfortable when I asked for the agreement in writing. One conversation from Pruitt framed correctly, and Grisham finds a reason to void it. The lease is written, Daniel said. He can't void it without cause. He doesn't need to void it, Emily said. He can make running the shop impossible. He can make suppliers unwilling to deal with me. He can make the women in Nora's circle afraid to be associated with me. He can make this town so uncomfortable for me that I leave on my own. She looked at the document. That's what he did to the widow with the laundry. He didn't take legal action. He just made the ground uninhabitable. The room was very quiet. But you're not the widow with the laundry, Daniel said. No. Emily agreed. I'm not. She kept looking at the document. She was running it the way she ran numbers methodically, looking for the error, the weakness in the column where the sum didn't add up. Pruitt was clever. He'd had 3 years since the boundary dispute to be more careful. He was building this patiently with documentation, with preparation. He was building a case. Then she saw it. The date on the promissory note was February 18, 1878. The farm sale was April 14th. The proceeds from the sale had produced $312. The two recorded debts, Marsh and Western Territorial, totaled $520, meaning the sale had produced a shortfall on Marsh's debt of $28. But the Pruitt note, $200, was not listed in the farm sale accounting. It wasn't listed anywhere in the settlement records, which meant one of two things: either the debt had been settled separately and privately, which would require documentation, or it had not been settled at all, and Pruitt had simply never filed it with the court. He didn't file it with the court, Emily said. Daniel followed her finger to the settlement records. She watched him read it. She watched his jaw set. He kept it off the official accounting, he said. Which means it was never adjudicated, Emily said. It's still a valid debt, technically, against my father, but it was never part of the legal proceeding. He kept it separate on purpose. Why? Daniel said. Emily sat back. Because a debt that's never been officially settled is a debt he can deploy whenever he wants, she said. He can't sue me, he knows that. But he can wave this paper at anyone in town and say, Thomas Carter borrowed $200 from me, and his family is here spending money, and the town will hear $200, and Thomas Carter and family, and they'll fill in the rest of the story themselves. She looked at Daniel. He's been holding this since February, she said. Before I even arrived, he's been waiting to see what I would do. And when I negotiated Grisham down and brought in 11 customers and had Hayes lumber on my shelves, that's when he decided I was a threat worth moving against. Daniel's hands were flat on the table. He's got a document that looks damaging but isn't legally actionable, he said, and he's going to use it as a social weapon. Yes, Emily said. Then we use the one thing he can't manufacture, Daniel said. She looked at him. What's that? The truth, he said. Documented, filed, in this office today. He turned to her fully. You write an affidavit stating that you were not party to Thomas Carter's debts, that you had no knowledge of the Pruitt note, and that you came to this county as an independent party. You get Whitfield to notarize it and file it in the same record. Then, if Pruitt shows that note to anyone, you've already got a countering document in the same archive. Emily stared at him. Can I do that? It's a public record office, Daniel said. Anyone can file an affidavit of fact. It's not a legal defense, but it's a public statement. And it means the conversation changes from Pruitt waving a note around to anyone who asks being able to come here and see both documents in the same file. She thought it through. He was right. It wasn't a legal remedy. She didn't need a legal remedy. What she needed was a counterweight. Something that made Pruitt's move more costly to execute, because now anyone who looked would see her response sitting right beside the accusation. Get Whitfield, she said. Bed. It took an hour. She wrote the affidavit herself in the careful and precise hand her mother had taught her alongside the needlework, because a clean hand is a sign of a careful mind, and a careful mind is a sign of someone worth listening to. Daniel read it when she was done and said only, add the date you arrived in town and the date you signed the lease. She added them. Whitfield notarized it with no questions beyond the necessary ones, filed it in the Carter folder, and charged her 30 cents. She paid with coins that had been part of Daniel's $20, and she did not feel any strangeness about that. The money had become something other than charity by now. It had become capital. She was deploying it. They were back in the wagon before 2 o'clock. The ride back was different from the ride out. The same road, the same heat, but the air between them had changed, not heavier, the opposite. Something had been resolved that had been pressing since before she'd walked through his gate with the quilts, and the resolution of it created a particular kind of ease. "You did that fast," Daniel said. "The affidavit." "I've been running numbers and writing facts my whole life," Emily said. "My mother kept the farm accounts. She taught me before I could properly read. She said a woman who can't read her own finances is a woman who has to trust other people to read them for her." She paused. She meant my father, though she didn't say so. "She was right," Daniel said. "She usually was." Emily looked at the road ahead. "She knew something was wrong with my father's finances 2 years before he admitted it. She told me once. Just once. She said Thomas means well, but he makes his decisions in the dark, and that's how you end up in the dark with him." She stopped. She hadn't meant to say that much. Daniel didn't push it. He let it stand as she'd set it down. "Why did you stay?" Emily said after a while. "In this town. After what Pruitt put you through." "Same reason you're staying now," he said. "Because leaving would mean he won," she said. "Because this is home," he said. "And I wasn't about to let Harlan Pruitt decide what was mine and what wasn't." She looked at his profile. "The farm you lost," she said. "North. You said it didn't survive." The pause was the same length as the one in his kitchen. The same quality. "My wife died," he said. "In the 3rd winter. Fever. Without her there was no reason to stay on that land." He kept his eyes on the road. "I came south, found this place, started again." Emily said nothing. She understood the grammar now. The 2 chairs in the kitchen, the functional house with no decorative touches. The porch board he replaced with meticulous care, as though the precision of the task was the point. A man who had rebuilt everything from the ground after losing the reason he'd built it the first time. A man who had learned, as she had, that the work itself is sometimes the only solid thing. "I'm sorry," she said. Simply. "Thank you," he said. Simply. They rode the last miles without speaking, and the silence was the kind that happens between people who have exchanged something real and need time to let it settle. When the wagon came down Main Street, Emily sat straight and looked at the shop front as they passed. The cracked window had been replaced. Grisham had kept that promise at least. The shop was dark and locked as she'd left it. Everything looked as she'd left it. But as Daniel pulled the wagon up and she stepped down, she saw it. The lock on the door was broken. Not forced, the hasp was open cleanly, the way a key opens it, not the way a crowbar does. But the door was pushed slightly inward. Someone had been inside. She pushed it open. The shelving was intact. The display quilts were untouched. The work table was as she'd left it. But the back room where she kept her account book, her supplier contacts, her records had been gone through. The drawer of the small desk was pulled open. Papers had been moved. Not scattered, not destroyed. Moved. Sorted through carefully and put back, but not in the order she kept them. Someone had come in, looked through her records and left. She stood in the back room doorway and felt something she had not expected, not fear, not fury, but a cold, absolute clarity. She knew what they'd been looking for, the same thing she'd spent the day in Abilene addressing. Documentation. Evidence of her connections, her finances, her arrangements. Evidence of Daniel. She came back to the front room. Daniel was standing just inside the door. "Someone was in the back room," she said. "They went through my papers." His face was still and very serious. "Anything taken?" "I don't believe so. They were looking, not taking." She looked at him. "I keep a duplicate of my accounts at the boarding house, in my room. I started doing that last week." Something moved in Daniel's expression. something that was respect without any softness attached to it. "You already anticipated this," he said. "I anticipated something," she said. "I didn't know what." She looked at the open drawer. "I do now." She crossed the room, picked up the chair, set it at the work table and sat down. She took out her notebook. She wrote the date, the time, and what she'd found in precise and careful hand. Evidence of unauthorized entry. Papers disturbed in back room. Nothing confirmed missing. Then she looked up. "I need a new lock," she said. "I'll have one here in 20 minutes, Daniel said. "And I need you to sit with me while I write down everything that was in that drawer," she said. "Every document, every name, every number. I need a witness to what I had and what I have now." She looked at him. "Pruitt is building a case. So am I." Daniel Hayes looked at Emily Carter in the failing afternoon light of her shop, the woman who had walked in a week ago with 7 quilts and 2 dimes, and had spent the intervening days negotiating leases, supplying 11 customers, filing affidavits, and was now, after finding her private papers, searched, sitting down to make a list. And what he felt was something he had not been prepared for. He had helped her because it was right, because it was what a decent man does when he sees something worth helping. He had not been prepared for her to be this. 20 minutes, he said. He went for the lock. She was still writing when he came back. She didn't stop when he came through the door. She just said, "I counted 14 documents in that drawer. I can account for all of them. None are missing." She turned the page. "Whoever came in here found nothing they could use, which means tomorrow Pruitt wakes up without what he came for." Daniel fitted the new lock to the door. The bolt slid home clean and certain. "He's going to move again," Emily said. "Soon. Because we were in Abilene today, and he knows it, or he'll know it by morning, and he's going to understand what that means." "He'll understand you found the note," Daniel said. "He'll understand I'm not afraid of the note," Emily said. She closed the notebook. She looked at Daniel across the room, the new lock solid behind him, the broken hasp on the floor, the list complete in her hand. She was tired in the way you are tired, when you have been careful for a very long time, and the careful has cost something real. But underneath the tired was the same thing she'd felt on the road back from Abilene. Solid. She felt solid. "He's made one mistake," she said. Daniel waited. "He searched my papers tonight because he needed to know what I had," she said. "Which means he doesn't know. Which means he's reacting." She looked at the notebook. "A man with a complete plan doesn't search your papers. A man who is worried about what you found does." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You've got him worried." "We've got him worried," Emily said. She picked up her coat. She looked at the man who had driven 2 hours to Abilene and back, and fitted a lock, and was standing in her doorway at the end of the longest day, and she understood that the thing she had refused to name since the ranch yard in the fading light was not going away. It was in fact getting louder the more she tried to set it aside. She was not ready to say what it was, but she was done pretending it wasn't there. "Go home," she said. "Sleep. I'll be at the shop at 6. "I'll check on the building at first light," he said. "Daniel." He stopped. "Thank you. For today. All of it." He looked at her, and he said very quietly the same thing he'd said the first time she'd thanked him for the money. "You're welcome." He went. She locked the new bolt behind him, and in the silence of her shop, with Pruitt's move accounted for, and her own counter-move already, in a county file in Abilene, Emily Carter sat down at her work table and allowed herself for exactly 60 seconds to feel everything she'd been carrying since April. The grief and the exhaustion and the fear and the $42 and the new lock and the man who had gone to Abilene with her without being asked twice. 60 seconds. She counted them. Then she stood up, put on her coat, and walked to the boarding house. Tomorrow Pruitt was going to move, and she intended to be several steps ahead of wherever he thought she was standing. Pruitt made his move on Monday morning. Emily knew it before she reached the shop. She knew it from the way Mrs. Mercer looked at her over breakfast, not unkindly, but with the particular careful neutrality of a woman who has heard something and is deciding whether saying it will help or harm. Emily had learned to read that look in the past week. She'd seen it on Grisham's face. She'd seen it on the face of the man from the feed store. It was the look of a town that had been talked to. She walked to the shop anyway, unlocked the new bolt, went inside, opened at 7. At 7:30, Margaret Hale came in. Not to buy. She stood in the center of the shop with her hands clasped and her jaw set, and the expression of a woman doing something that costs her something. "I want you to know," Margaret said, "that what Pruitt is saying has no effect on me personally. I know quality work when I see it. And I know what a $28 debt against a man who has already left the state means in a court of law, which is nothing." She paused. "But 2 of my circle are frightened. I can't speak for them. I wanted you to hear it from me directly rather than through the street." "I appreciate that," Emily said. "What are you going to do?" Margaret said. "What I've been doing," Emily said. "Work." Margaret looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once with the firmness of a decision made. "I'll be back Wednesday," she said. She left. The next woman to come in was a stranger, someone Emily hadn't seen before, a lean woman in her 40s, with sun-weathered hands and the self-contained manner of a rancher's wife who drives her own wagon. She stood at the display quilt and touched the stitching and said without turning, "Word is, you're Thomas Carter's girl." "I am," Emily said. "My husband borrowed money from Pruitt 4 years ago," the woman said. She turned. "Lost half our cattle trying to pay it back. The interest on that man's loans is designed to keep you in debt, not to be repaid." She looked at Emily steadily. "Anyone he's gone after is someone I'm inclined to support." She put $2 on the table. "I'll take whatever that buys me in good batting." Emily sold her 4 yards and a spool of thread, and the woman left without giving her name. And Emily stood in the quiet shop and understood that Pruitt's move had cut 2 ways, as overreach often does. He had frightened 2 women away, and he had driven others in. By noon, she had 6 customers. 3 of them mentioned Pruitt. All 3 of them mentioned him the way you mentioned something you've examined and dismissed. She sold $31 before closing, which was not the 42 of Wednesday, but was more than she'd expected from a morning that had started with Mrs. Mercer's careful eyes at the breakfast table. She was counting the till when Daniel came through the door. His face told her before he spoke. Not alarm, something more controlled than alarm. Controlled anger, which in a man like Daniel Hayes was more significant than open fury because it meant the situation was serious enough to require management. "Grisham came to the ranch this morning," he said. Emily set the money down. "What did he want?" "He wants to renegotiate the lease," Daniel said. "He says he's received information that creates a conflict with the original arrangement. He wants you out by the end of the month." The room was very still. "He can't do that," Emily said. "The lease is written." "He knows that. He's not claiming a legal right." Daniel looked at her. "He's offering to return your first month's payment and cover the cost of moving your goods. He framed it as doing you a favor." Emily pressed one hand flat on the table, the same gesture she'd been making for weeks, grounding herself against the pull of the thing trying to knock her sideways. "Pruitt got to him. Pruitt told him about your father's debt," Daniel said. "The $200 note. He told Grisham that lending business premises to a woman from a family with outstanding debts to a local creditor was a reputational risk." He paused. "Grisham is not a brave man. He does the calculation differently than you do." Emily looked at the new bolt on the door, at the fence plank shelving, at the display quilts her mother had made through arthritis and lamplight. "When does he want an answer?" "He gave me 3 days, Daniel said. "He came to me because he didn't want to face you directly." Something sharp moved through Emily at that, not flattering what Grisham's cowardice said about how he saw her, and not unflattering either. He'd gone around her because he knew she would not fold. She filed that information and moved on. "All right," she said. "All right," Daniel said. "All right, we have 3 days." She looked at him. "Sit down." He sat. She pulled her notebook across the table and opened it to a fresh page. "Pruitt has the note," she said. We have the affidavit. He has Grisham. What do we have that he doesn't know about? Daniel was quiet, thinking. The filing error, he said. From my boundary dispute. It's still in the record. Pruitt's original land claim on the North Quarter was recorded one day past the legal window. I never pursued it further because the dispute was settled and I had the land I needed. But that irregularity is still there. Emily wrote it down. What does that mean for him now? By itself, nothing, Daniel said. The boundary dispute was resolved, but Consolidated Land Holdings, the company on your father's note, that's Pruitt's land acquisition operation. If that company has other filings in Hayes County, and if those filings have similar irregularities. He stopped. Emily looked up. You think there are other irregular filings, she said. I think a man who cut a corner once cuts corners habitually, Daniel said. I think if I went back to those county records and looked at every filing under Consolidated Land Holdings, I might find that the boundary dispute error wasn't isolated. She looked at him across the table. If we found another irregular filing, it wouldn't help you with Grisham directly, Daniel said. But it would mean Pruitt has a vulnerability he doesn't know we've identified. And a man with a vulnerability changes his calculations when he realizes you're holding the same paper he thought only he had read. Emily thought it through at full speed. The logic was sound. Pruitt's power in this town rested on his position as a creditor and landowner on the legitimacy of his holdings. If any of those holdings had procedural defects in their recording, he couldn't afford to have that examined publicly. Which meant, if she could find one, just one, she had something to set against the note, not legally, but as a counterweight. The same way the affidavit worked. Mutual exposure, a standoff. We need to go back to Abilene, she said. Tomorrow, Daniel said. I can't. Today, I have hands coming to move cattle in the morning, and I can't leave the ranch short. He looked at her. Can you hold 2 more days? I have $31 today, Emily said. And I have the lease on paper. Grisham can want to renegotiate all he likes. I'm not leaving without cause, and we both know it. She paused. Let Pruitt think he's winning. Let Grisham sit with his discomfort. We leave for Abilene Wednesday at 5. Daniel nodded. Then he said, Emily. She looked at him. When this is resolved, he stopped, started again. I want to say something, and I need you to hear it as not as something connected to any of this, not as strategy or arrangement. He was choosing the words with visible care, which was unusual for a man who usually said things plain. I want to say it separate from Pruitt and Grisham and county records. The room was very quiet. All right, Emily said. I haven't, he said. Since Clara died, I haven't. I didn't expect to find anyone who... He looked at the table briefly, looked back at her. I didn't expect you, he said. That's what I'm trying to say. I didn't expect you to walk through the gate with those quilts. I didn't expect any of this. A pause. And I don't want to say it on the wrong side of a fight, because I don't want you thinking it's connected to me wanting to protect you. I don't want to protect you. You don't need protecting. I just... Daniel, Emily said. He stopped. I know, she said. 2 words. But they were the right 2 words, and they both understood it. He stood up, put his hat back on. His expression was the most open she had ever seen it. All the careful management of it set aside for just a moment, and what was underneath was something she recognized because she'd been carrying the same thing for days. Wednesday, 5 o'clock, he said. 5 o'clock, she said. He went. She sat in the quiet shop for a long time after the sound of his boots faded, her hands still on the notebook, not writing anything. Just sitting with the particular quality of a moment that has changed the shape of things and requires time to settle into its new arrangement. Then she picked up her pen and got back to work. Abilene on Wednesday produced what Daniel had predicted. Whitfield found the Consolidated Land Holdings files in 20 minutes. There were 11 filings over 6 years. Daniel went through them with the methodical patience he gave everything important, and Emily sat beside him and matched dates against the Kansas land recording statutes she'd asked Whitfield to pull, and on the fourth filing she found it. A ranch property on the south end of Hays County recorded in the name of Consolidated Land Holdings on March 3, 1875. The legal recording window under Kansas statute required filing within 60 days of the transfer agreement. The transfer agreement in the same file was dated December 29, 1874. December 29th to March 3rd was 64 days. 4 days past the legal window. Emily set her finger on the date, said nothing. Let Daniel read it. He read it twice. Then he said very quietly, "There it is." "This one is not a boundary dispute," Emily said. "This is a recording defect on a property he currently holds. If this were challenged, he'd lose the property," Daniel said, "or spend a very long time in court defending it." He looked at her. "This is bigger than what I found 3 years ago." Emily sat back. Her mind was moving at full speed, and she let it move. "I don't want to challenge it," she said. Daniel looked at her. "I don't want his property, and I don't want a court case," she said. "I want him to stop." She looked at the filing. "I want him to understand that if he continues pursuing me, this comes to light. And I want him to understand it without me having to say it directly." "How?" "I file another affidavit," Emily said. "In this record, an affidavit of inspection, I state that I have reviewed the Consolidated Land Holdings filings in the course of researching my own family's debt history, and I note the relevant dates of the March 3, 1875 filing for the record." She looked at Daniel. "I don't allege anything. I don't make a legal claim. I simply put my name in the same file as his irregularity. He'll know what that means. Any lawyer he consults will tell him what that means." Daniel was quiet for a full 10 seconds. Then he said, "You're giving him a way to back down without a public confrontation." "I'm giving him a reason to," Emily said. "There's a difference." She paused. "A man like Pruitt doesn't back down from confrontation. But he'll protect his holdings. That's what he's spent 20 years building. He won't risk the property over a quilting shop on Main Street if he understands what's already in this file. And if he doesn't back down, then I have a very well-documented trail and a very good affidavit and the name of a lawyer in Topeka who owes me 30 minutes. She picked up the pen Whitfield had left on the table. "But he'll back down." She wrote the affidavit. Clean, precise, factual 3 sentences, noting her review of the filings and the dates observed. Signed it. Whitfield notarized it and filed it without comment because it was a public record office, and that was his job, and charged her 30 cents, and she paid him with coins that no longer felt like Daniel's money and hadn't for some time. She was her own now. Everything she was spending was her own. Pruitt came to the shop on Friday afternoon. Emily was alone. She had known he would come, had known it from the moment the Abilene filing was complete, because a man who monitors his opposition as carefully as Pruitt does will always have someone in a county records office who tells him when papers are being reviewed. He would know she'd been there. He would know what file she'd looked at, and he was smart enough to know exactly what that meant. He came in without knocking. He stood in the center of the shop and looked at her, and he was not the same man who had stood here 10 days ago with the measuring eyes and the careful welcome. He was a man who has been maneuvered and knows it, and the knowledge sat in him like something swallowed wrong. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Pruitt," she said. She did not stand up. She remained at her work table with her hands calm and her account book open in front of her, because she was in the middle of her work, and she saw no reason to interrupt it for him. He looked at the shelving, at the quilts, at the bolt on the door that had replaced the broken lock and was visibly new. He took all of it in with the same quick appraisal as before, and this time what she saw in his small eyes was something different from the first visit. Recalculation. "It seems you've been busy in Abilene," he said. "I've had several occasions to visit the county records," Emily said. "It's a well-organized office, very complete." "Is that so?" he said. "Mr. Whitfield keeps excellent files," she said, Everything is exactly where you'd expect to find it. The silence between them had shape and weight. He was measuring her the way you measure someone who has turned out to be more than you had accounted for, and she was letting him measure, because the measuring itself was its own kind of concession. "I may have spoken to Grisham prematurely," Pruitt said. The words came out flat and without warmth because they were not an apology. They were a tactical retreat dressed in civilian clothing. "The information I provided him was incomplete, in context." "I appreciate your saying so," Emily said. Same tone she'd used for his welcome, as though it were a perfectly ordinary statement. "I'll speak with him," Pruitt said. "I don't anticipate he'll have further concerns about the lease arrangement." "I don't anticipate that either," Emily said. He looked at her one more time, the full direct look of a man who is committing something to memory. "You're Thomas Carter's daughter," he said. "I am," she said. "And I'm also Emily Carter, who runs this shop, who keeps meticulous records, and who intends to be on this street for a very long time." She met his eyes without any effort. "I hope we understand each other, Mr. Pruitt." The mustache moved, not toward a smile, toward something more complicated than a smile, the expression of a man who has found something he didn't expect to find in a place he thought he understood. He put his hat on. He walked to the door. He put his hand on the new bolt and paused for just a moment, registering it she knew the same way she'd registered every detail he'd given her, and then he left. Emily waited until she heard his boots clear the boardwalk. Then she put down her pen and pressed both hands flat on the table and let herself feel it, the full force of what had just happened in her shop, in her own space, on her own terms. She had not been rescued. She had not been fortunate. She had read the ground correctly, gathered the information, filed the papers, made the argument, and stood in her own doorway until the man who'd come to move her off it had run his calculation and decided the cost was too high. She had done that. By herself, with the tools, she had a precise hand, a clear head, and a knowledge of what things are worth. She thought of her mother, of Ruth Carter at the kitchen table, with her account books and her needle and the lamp burning low, because oil cost money, and you used the last of it before you bought more. She thought of the 7 quilts and what they'd bought her, not just $20. The whole chain of things, the shop and the lock and the affidavit and this moment in this chair in this room. She thought of Daniel. She found him at the ranch before supper time. He was on the porch, not replacing a board this time, just sitting, which she had never seen him do before. And the sight of it was unexpectedly moving a man who works with constant purpose, allowing himself 1 hour of stillness. He saw her come through the gate and read her face the way he always did, immediately and accurately. He stood. "Pruitt came in today," she said. "I know," he said. "He passed the north fence this afternoon. He was riding fast." "He's going to speak to Grisham," Emily said. "The lease stands." Daniel let out a breath that was not quite a sigh, and was more than one. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she said. He shook his head slightly. "You did it, Emily. I drove a wagon and fitted a lock. You read the statute and wrote the affidavit and stood in your shop and let him understand what was at stake without saying a word he could use against you." He looked at her directly. "That was you." She stood at the foot of the porch steps and looked up at him. All the distance between them, the careful, necessary, appropriate distance she had maintained since the first morning she'd walked through the gate, felt different now. Not gone. Renegotiated, maybe. Moved to a place where it was still honest but no longer required as armor. "I want to say something," she said, "and I need you to hear it the same way you asked me to hear yours. Not connected to any of this." He waited. The full, attentive waiting she'd come to know as one of the most rare and valuable things about him. "I came here to build something of my own," she said. "That was the whole of what I intended. I wasn't looking for anything else. I want you to know that. What I feel is not because of what you did. It's not gratitude." She paused. "It's something I would have felt if you'd done nothing. If you'd just been the man you are and stood where you stand." She held his gaze. "I need you to understand the difference." "I understand it," he said, quietly, completely. Good, she said. He came down one step. Stayed there. Close enough that the distance had become a choice rather than a default. I'm not a complicated man, he said. I know what I have here, and I know what I want it to become, and I'm not in the habit of waiting past the point when a thing is clear. He paused. It's clear, Emily. It is, she said. What? She opened the shop on Saturday at 7. The window was repaired. The bolt was new. The shelves were full. Nora Bell came in at 8 with the ink-stained teacher and Margaret Hale and 3 women. Emily hadn't met yet, and the morning went the way good mornings go, with work and noise and money exchanged at a fair price for a fair thing. She sold a double-stitched quilt top to the teacher, who turned it in her hands the same way Daniel had turned the first one, and said, "My grandmother made quilts like this. I thought no one did anymore." And Emily said, "Someone does," and meant it entirely. By noon, she had customers she hadn't had last week. By week's end, she had orders she would need 2 months to fill. Word had moved through the town the way word does in small places. Not as rumor this time, but as recommendation. Daniel Hayes's woman on Main Street, they said, and she let them say it because a woman who has built something solid enough to stand on doesn't quibble over the names people use for the ground. Grisham extended the lease to 1 year in writing and apologized without meeting her eyes. She accepted without making it harder than it needed to be. Pruitt's name came up less and less. Some things, once the leverage is removed, simply deflate. And on a Wednesday evening in October, with the first cold coming down from the north, and the shop closed, and the account book showing 4 months of consistent profit, Daniel Hayes asked Emily Carter to marry him on his porch steps. Not with flourish, not with speeches, but with the same plain directness he gave to everything that mattered. He said, "I want you here, not as a favor, not as a charity, as the person who belongs beside me on this ground." She said yes, not out of desperation, not out of gratitude, not because she had run out of road or out of options or out of time. She said yes because she had built the life she came here to build with her hands and her numbers, and her mother's stitching, and her own precise, unyielding spine, and she wanted to share it with a man who had never once asked her to be smaller than she was. That is how a woman who walked into a strange town with 7 quilts and 2 dimes and a cracked button became the person she had always been capable of being. Not because anyone saved her, because she refused to be anything less than whole, and found in the end that wholeness has a way of drawing toward it the one thing that deserves it.